I think it's impossible to know what it's like to be a research subject unless you hear it from their mouths. I mean, I think a researcher who does research might think that she or he knows what it's like to be on the other side of the stethoscope or needle or bone marrow biopsy instrument or, drug dose. But I believe very strongly in the, walk a mile in someone's moccasins. And I also believe very profoundly and will always believe that you can't talk about us without us. If you're talking about an affected group, if we're talking about how to make sure research subjects are treated ethically, why wouldn't we ask them? Why wouldn't we have them tell us what feels good about participating in research and what feels disrespected about participating in research or disrespectful? Why don't we have them tell us what they wish if they were king or lord of the manor or, head of NIH or FDA? So to me, it just makes sense. But I know that there have been several things along the way that have really reinforced that very powerfully, because we'll have a conference and someone will talk about research subjects and make assumptions that are later contradicted by the subjects themselves. And everyone can discount that. Well, it's that subject's perspective. But when you hear it enough, you start to understand. And again, this is something that in medicine in general has been borne out. Ken Schwartz was a lawyer in Boston who died of lung cancer about 15 years ago. And he wrote an extraordinary piece in the Boston Globe about how the caregivers that really mattered to him were the nurses who stopped to touch him or say a kind word or listen to him or just sit with him. Whereas the doctors, all of whom were at a very eminent hospital in Boston and obviously very accomplished, skilled people, did not think of him as anything other than a sick and ultimately a dying man, and really did nothing to care for his soul as well as his body, and how that was so painful to him, because ultimately the caring of the nurses and other auxiliary professionals was what made his disease and ultimately the end of his life bearable. So when you hear about it from the affected person's perspective, I feel you are morally obligated to listen and to interweave their impressions and their requests into your practice. I know that although now the word retarded is thankfully considered, as well it should be, a horrible thing to say to anyone. When I was growing up, and even when my children were young, it was a word that was thrown around a lot. And I used to lead a curriculum in my children's school called Understanding Disabilities. And we would show films about disabilities, and we would bring in people with, it was an 8-week curriculum, and we'd bring in, it was 4th grade, we'd bring in people with different disabilities. And we'd bring in some people who were developmentally disabled. And one of these 4th graders said to one of these groups, there were 4 individuals who were developmentally disabled, "How does it make you feel if people call you retarded?" And one of the men said, "It makes me so sad I want to cry. I know that's a bad word, and it makes me feel like someone doesn't know who I am." And then the woman said, "I hate that." I mean, they were all so adamant about it, and they were all very gentle, kind people. So, again, that just reminded me that, some people may say, well, it's just a word and it just means slow, but everyone understands it has a symbolic meaning as well as maybe a literal one. And again, it happens over and over when we've had research subjects. We had a young woman who I believe was 20 from South Africa who had HIV, and she had written a letter to her caregivers that she read at our conference, and it said, "I respect you, but I wonder if you respect me." And so to hear that, you can't, if I were a researcher, if I was someone who was educating researchers, I don't think I could ever have a researcher-subject interaction without thinking about her and really trying harder to be more sensitive to subjects and their needs.